Call the Lane County Budget Committee to order on Tuesday, May 6th. The first item, I think, is committee business, which will be the election of fiscal year 25-26 chair and vice chair. Do I have any motions? Chair.
For chair, yeah.
For chair.
I'd like to make a motion or a nomination.
It looked like Commissioner Buck had her hand.
Oh,
I'm happy to
Who's
go.
running the meeting here? Is he running the meeting or you?
well, who started? Go ahead.
Okay. I would like to nominate Holly Marconte for chair, if she's so willing. Knowing that you weren't, oh, great. Knowing that it sounded like you weren't interested in continuing, so I just wanted to verify that too.
Oh, yeah, no, I believe having the chair and the vice chair and having a succession thing is really good.
Excellent.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, I did that.
Okay, Greg. Thank you. Any other nominations? All those in favor for Holly being the chair for this next fiscal year, say aye.
Aye. Congrats.
Congratulations.
There you go. Where are you going?
It's on. Yeah, you push it if you don't want to be on.
Thank you. I believe we are now taking motions for a vice chair. Commissioner Trigger?
Thank you. I'd like to nominate, if she's willing to serve, Sarah Means to serve as vice chair for this year.
Sure.
Second. She's got a second.
Any discussion? Okay. Any other nominations? All right. All those in favor of Member Means stepping in as vice chair, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you.
You're done.
Right. I think our next item of business is to approve the committee minutes from October 7th, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Please say
Aye.
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 All right, I think motion carries. All right. And it looks like our third item is committee process.
Thank you. So we don't have any changes to process, although the committee received information at your pre-meeting orientation. You saw what the schedule is, so we'd be looking to see if there's any comments from the committee. Maybe just briefly too, just a little bit of committee business for you. There are some no name tags that you can get upstairs if you need to for the members that don't have access up there. So you could grab one of those. The restrooms out in the hallway are also open. So,
Okay, thank you.
and maybe one other comment is that you do have some materials. I saw some of you already replacing them in your binders. So just as we were finalizing materials, finding little typos or none of the main numbers on the sauce forms that you've received have changed, but there might have been differences in the reduction and the current service level, just a little bit there. So there's corrections there, and then all of those corrections have already been posted online for the public, so they would see the latest greatest.
Excellent. Thank you, Christine. So it looks like our next agenda item is the budget message. So I'll turn it over to Administrator Mokrahysky.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I was talking to Greg Rickoff on the way in here, reflecting on the fact that it was 5 years ago that we were having this budget committee meeting remotely. It was at the beginning of the pandemic. We did that in 2020 and then again in 2021. I think in 2020 we were all at home, and then in 2021 sort of different locations. So a lot has changed. That was a different time of chaos. We're in sort of a different period, different issues that are creating chaos in our world today, and I'll touch on some of those, but I wanted to start. What I'd like to do this evening is focus on a little bit of historical context. I know this feels like a broken record to a lot of folks, but answering the question of why, kind of starting with why are we in the situation that we're in with these sort of annual budget challenges, I think is important context for all of us to kind of ground in these issues, as well as for our employees and our residents. So talk a little bit about historical context. I want to talk about our values and our values-based approach to the budget process, and that's sort of the how we go about this process each year that has been really pretty consistent, I'd say, over the past decade. I think this is my 11th budget, my 11th proposed budget. I was here in 14, 15, but I didn't put that budget together. And we've been pretty consistent in how we approach this process. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the what actually is in this budget. How did we go about making the adjustments necessary to bring this forward to you? So start with does that sound okay? All right. If you want to ask questions or clarify, we have a few slides here that Christine will put up. We can do that. What's that?
We're working on it.
Oh, we're working on it. So not yet. You have time. You have time.
Yeah.
So on Friday, I was talking to the Washington County Administrator, who's my peer, a friend of mine, someone that I respect greatly, Tanya Angie. She's been in Washington County for a number of years, and we were talking about, we both serve on a national board together. She actually serves as the president of the International City County Management Association right now, representing about 13,000 city managers and county administrators across the world. She's an incredible local government leader. One of the best that I know and have the pleasure of working with. So we were talking about this kind of world that we're in today and the challenges that our organizations are facing, particularly here in Oregon. And of course, we're different than Washington County, but we do face some similar challenges. So we're talking about kind of the budget challenges and just the chaos and these different things. And I said, Tanya, how are you handling this with, as a leader in local government? And she said, I tell our people almost every day, we're not going to meet chaos with chaos. I thought that's a really poignant, brief but poignant statement. We have a lot of uncertainty and chaos out there right now. There's, certainly uncertainty from the federal government. We have great support and engagement with our state partners, but there's also uncertainty in every legislative session. We continue to struggle with both policy restrictions and funding restrictions that we need the state's help with. And so there's uncertainty at the state level. And then, of course, we have local pressures here in Lane County that we'll talk about tonight. But it's hard for us, I think, to just focus on our proposed budget without sort of understanding the broader context of the other challenges that we live in. Our approach, as I mentioned, over the past decade, through natural disasters, we've seen many natural disasters. We've seen labor disputes that have caused disruption. We had a pandemic, as I mentioned, and then, of course, our funding constraints and challenges that are very unique here in Lane County. We'll talk about tonight. All of those things, we try to have this approach of leading with clarity, focus, determination, and steady leadership in times of chaos, times of disruption. Trying to be, the adults in the room, if you will. It's a really hard thing to do when things are swirling around and there's uncertainty, there's strong emotions about things. It's hard to do that, but it's more important than ever at times of chaos and uncertainty for leaders. And I look in this room, we're all leaders organizationally and in the community in different ways. And so leading with in times of chaos with that clarity, focus, determination, and steady calm as much as possible is really important. I want to acknowledge, and I thought about this, like, gosh, you're really starting as kind of a downer here. I thought, well, can I tell a nice story or, or how do we, and the reality is it's kind of hard to do that because this is just, we have a lot of really heavy things that we're dealing with. So I am going to get serious with you. And I want to acknowledge the stress, the strain, the anxiety, and the fear that so many of our people, both within the organization and the community, feel right now because of all of this uncertainty. And it looks different than the uncertainty that we've seen in the past. An example I gave this morning, we talked about at the board meeting, was the Environmental Protection Agency grant that we applied for, Lane County applied for $20 million. Applied for it, we were awarded, executed the contract, everything was great. This was $20 million that we were planning to invest in 6 different parts of the community, mostly rural parts of Lane County. All outside of Eugene, actually, except for the Bethel School District, Willamette Lane and Springfield, and then our rural communities to establish emergency shelters largely for our rural residents where emergency shelters don't exist, to meet the needs of shelter needs of our community members in the time of disaster. We received a letter on Friday, this last Friday, saying that award had been canceled. That agreement had been canceled, really without a basis. The comment in the award was that the objectives of the award are no longer a priority. So things like this are difficult. And I also say our employees are out there every day and we are literally having conversations among leadership in the organization about the fear of employees of getting arrested for doing their job and how we respond to that. So these are, my intent here is not to inflame these issues. My intent is simply to set the table for some of the reality of the challenges that we face. That this was said in a meeting earlier today. I've actually, a few people have said it. It's not normal. It is chaos, but it's not normal chaos. And so I think we have to understand those challenges and understand that while there is this storm of uncertainty and chaos swirling around us, what we want to try to do in Lane County is be the eye of the storm. You know what I mean by that? What happens at the eye of the storm is it's actually a sense of calm, right? Steadiness, clarity. You can sort of see everything all the chaos that is happening outside. So the extent to which, as leaders, organizationally and community leaders, we can seek to be in the eye of the storm with as much clarity and purpose and dedication and focus and calm as we can muster to lead during this time. All right. So we're going to do a little history here, walk through, have some slides, and then we'll talk more about some of the how and the what. But first, the why. All right, so here's our process. You see we showed this at the leadership team meeting back in January. And I will talk about this in a minute, that we actually started this budget process rather early in October of 2024. But this is sort of the calendar of the process. Here we are in early to mid-May. You have the proposed budget in front of you, and you've read it and are digesting it. And we'll have several work sessions over the next few days to talk more about that. You will then approve the budget as the Budget Committee in mid-May, and then it will go to the Board of Commissioners for adoption by mid-June. This is what it looks like. We have the proposed budget includes 2,009 full-time equivalent positions, a little over $1.2 billion, 11 departments. I wanted to show this slide. This is the first decline in positions that we've seen in over a decade. We've seen net growth, really significant net growth. Again, very important to point out that that growth has come largely, almost exclusively, from this period of time, from state and federal dollars that we've received, right? Growth in when we had Medicaid expansion, growth in our community health centers, increases in funding for priorities from the state government, particularly in developmental disabilities and public health areas. So that increases come with revenue largely outside of Lane County, not within Lane County. That's a big risk that we face, that this budget does not address, because we don't have certainty about what the future looks like. But it's important, I think, for us to continue to be at the eye of the storm, monitoring and watching for other things that may impact the really important work that we do. I've reflected over the years on how complicated local government budgeting is, particularly in counties. We just have so many different funds, 34 different funds, that are all really restricted in the way where the revenue comes is unique usually, and how we spend it is oftentimes mostly restricted in those areas. And we end up, sometimes the funds can get conflated. We talk a lot about the general fund, which is the pull-out blue piece of the pie there. We talk about the general fund because that's where the property tax revenue goes, right? And that is the funding that funds a lot of the core foundational services that counties were established originally to provide in law enforcement and general government, right? So our sheriff's office, district attorney's office, a lot of our community justice services, a lot of that public safety system is funded out of there. Assessment and taxation, these are all mandated services, elections, and the other general government. And then the general fund also helps provide support to other funds that cannot charge a fee or doesn't have revenue that grows at the rate that that fund needs to pay for its expenses. That makes sense? So subsidize the areas like things like behavioral health or planning and building or parole and probation, and you'll see some of those other ones. We don't subsidize those other funds in the way that a lot of other local governments do because of the constraints we have on our property tax here in Lane County. So just important to keep this again in mind, that when we talk about our budget as one thing, it's one document you have in front of you, but it's a collection of 34 different parts. And that is really complex and challenging. And so again, as we see, sometimes we see growth and increase in certain places, and then we see reduction, contraction in other places. It can be difficult to reconcile those, but very important to understand them. I'm not going to talk about that slide. It's the history of O&C counties, and I'm just not going to go into it. But this slide is important, I think. This shows going back to 1974. Is that right? The timber-related funding that Lane County received. I think one of the takeaways I have from this slide is the volatility of timber funding. Okay, you see up and down and up and down. It's clearly been a big part of our local economy, our economy in Oregon and here in Lane County, right? We relied heavily on timber, the timber industry for jobs and for revenue. And it's a large part of the reason that we're stuck in this artificially low permanent property tax rate that we have. Does this work? Can you see that? Okay. Do you see this here? So 1974. What does that say? 4.7?
7.2.
Oh, okay, 7.2. Okay, thank you. $7.2 million in 1970. Anyone want to guess what, let's have low class participation here. Anyone want to guess what 7.2 million, is that what it is? 7.2 million is today? Good try. Anyone else? 17.5. Actually, you can go to this number and just move the decimal point. Is that 4.7? Right there? It's $47 million. So if we had this today, it'd be 47 million. That's what that was. That's what it meant to the county back in that day. So just, gosh, some context for how important this was. This is the 36 counties in Oregon. The permanent property tax rates for the 36 counties in Oregon. And, you see Lane County here as the 7th lowest permanent rate. I think the more important visual to take from that are these 6 counties. So you see Lane County at the $1.28. We don't have our public safety levy on here, which is 55 cents. But in comparison to the 5 other counties in Oregon that we tend to compare ourselves to, because of population size, we're a mix of urban and rural. There's just a lot of similarities between Lane County and Jackson, Washington, Deschutes, Marion, and Clackamas. Probably those 5 are the best comparisons we have. One difference is none of them are really timber counties, so they don't face the same issues we face. But I think important here, you do see Deschutes County this is a permanent rate they have on top of their original rate. This is a public safety rate, so they're effective, what is that? It's almost it's a little under $3. A note here, just for context, I put this in the budget message. You could take the geographic size of Washington County, Clackamas County, and Marion County. You could put them all in Lane County, and you'd still have like 1,000 square miles to play with. So just, we have a really big geographic area. So when we think about the sheriff providing services, or any of the services that have to be delivered physically in some way to these outlying places, there's a huge geographic area that we're trying to provide levels of support that these other counties don't have, really. Deschutes a little bit, but not the size of us. Jackson a little bit, but not the size of us. So you see their rates. Another interesting point here that I think is important, again, Lane County's rate is so low because we had that timber revenue. Why do we need to tax our local residents when we have all the timber revenue? And then the timber revenue the changes started happening, the property tax caps go into effect in the mid-90s, and then we're frozen in this place. And if you look at, Marion County, I think, was the example that we cited here. Lane County's property tax revenue that we collect, around about $53 million, and I think that's about right, $53 million projected for next fiscal year. Marion County's about $100 million, so almost double what we have, yet they have 40,000 less in population and a fraction of the geographic area with which to provide services. And if you look at the cities, you know, another interesting point that I always find is you look at all the cities within these jurisdictions, Hillsborough, Beaverton, Bend, Salem, you can even throw Portland in there. We don't sort of talk about Multnomah and Portland, but all of those city rates are significantly lower than our biggest city. Our biggest city actually is one of the highest permanent rates at $7 per thousand. And so what's happened is that, you know, in certain places in Lane County, particularly in the largest city, it's not necessarily that property taxpayers are paying less, even though the county rate is lower, because the city is taken. Does that make sense? Whereas when you look at all these other cities, Hillsborough has a $3.70 rate, Beaverton has a $4 rate, Bend has a $2.80 rate, Portland has a $4.58 rate, Salem has a 5.8 rate, Eugene is at $7. So it's just, there's a huge imbalance there that you see. And it's important, I think, to think from, we oftentimes think about it from the government standpoint, right? Like, we're so much lower than these other counties. It's also, I think, important to look at it from the taxpayer standpoint. There's also, you know, in terms of what the burden is on the taxpayer, that conversation is important as well. In Washington County, just to wrap that point up, Washington County receives about $208 million in property tax revenue. So again, we get 53, Washington County gets 208. They're a different county, Portland metro area, much larger economic base in terms of their tax, you know, their commercial and industrial tax revenue that they have there. And the city of Eugene, as an example, receives $137 million in property tax revenue in its general fund to our 53 million. So it gives you that. And here's the, you know, this is the assessor has this graphic on the website, and the percentage of each dollar in Lane County that Lane County keeps. We collect it all, and then we distribute it out to the 84 some taxing districts in Lane County, and we keep 12 cents of the dollar to spend on county services. By the way, the services that the assessment and taxation provide are not paid for by any of those taxing districts. They're funded through Lane County's portion of the property tax revenue and a little bit of state revenue, which the assessor is working hard on. And then, of course, when timber revenue dried up and the federal government sort of stepped in, because it was federal policies that created that downturn, this Secure Rural Schools entitlement program was developed, and that was the funding. Again, you've seen this chart, most of you, many times. It shows inflation adjusted back in 2001-2, about $60 million total between the road fund and the general fund that we would have today if we still had those dollars, what that looks like. You can just imagine what $30 or $40 million more today would mean. It would fund the sheriff's office, rural patrol, and additional prosecutors in the DA's office, and some additional, maybe a little bit of additional funding for assessment and taxation and a few other areas. So this is the core problem we're dealing with, and I know there's been a lot of conversation at the federal level around efficiencies, government efficiencies, and even here locally around government efficiencies, and that's all we're doing. That every year we're doing efficiencies. That's what the cuts and the reductions look like. We have been doing efficiencies, if you call it that, for many years, a decade or more than a decade, I'd say. We're not going to efficiency our way into funding the areas that are fundamentally underfunded because we have such a low property tax rate. I'm starting to hope that I have something good to say or positive for you all. Maybe I'll try to find something, but I know this is a sobering conversation. So wanted to also, this is kind of a timeline, if you will, of the last decade. Back in 2012-13 was the last really big sort of funding challenge as SRS dollars fell off a cliff there, and the county was forced to make about a $10 million reduction in the general fund at the time, eliminated nearly 200 positions across the county. over almost 13% of the workforce at the time. And May of that year was the passage of the public safety levy. A lot of work there that happened on the sheriff's office and board of commissioners and others to help patch up that really critical area of our public safety system. In 2000, in the last then 10 years or so, we focused a lot. You see these periods of chaos and uncertainty, and through all of it, a lot of it, we faced some budget challenges. We had a period where we were structurally balanced. We put a lot of effort into what we said, and I'll touch on these values in a minute. What we said is we don't want to impact our people. Our people are important, right? And by people, we mean the people we serve in the community, the residents that live in our community, and the people that we employ to provide those services. We're trying to make sure that we do everything we can do to, I hesitate to say be creative, but really do the hard work of thoughtfully evaluating what are reductions, what are adjustments on the revenue side where possible, also on the expense side. So we spent a lot of time and years around things like benefit costs and health insurance to try to manage those expenses and keep the pace of growth not at 10%, but closer to 0 for many years. Debt prepayment and the PERS side account, just a lot of things that weren't really, they didn't grab headlines because they're not really exciting or flashy. It's not a chainsaw kind of thing. It's more like, the really looking very carefully at surgical adjustments that we can make. So we did a lot of that, and that was very helpful. I mean, we did not have reductions in positions or layoffs. We were actually able to invest a little bit here and there strategically. It wasn't enough in the areas we need more of, but a little bit here and there. We've seen little drops of that in patrol, not enough, but little drops of it to try to demonstrate what we could do more if we had more resource in those areas. Of course, we had the pandemic that really reset a lot of things. The way in which we work, it drove a huge need for counties, our county in particular, to lead. We received a lot of funding, state and federal dollars, in support of that. It was a period of abundance, really, to meet the need of the community, the public at the time, that was followed by this period of contraction. It was sort of reconciling with that growth that happened that for a little bit of a time, I think, created a sort of a smokescreen towards the reality of the fundamental challenges that we faced here. Also following that period was this high inflation, right? So as we're all organizations, public and private, are having to deal with those inflationary pressures, both labor costs, material costs, construction, all of those things. So we're back now to this place of really wrestling with the structural deficit we have, the growth of expenses, over revenues, and how we work each budget year to try to manage that at the same time as we think strategically about how we fix some of the long-term, what feel like intractable funding challenges, particularly for our public safety system. These are the funds that Christine will talk more about that remain structurally unbalanced. There are 9 of those funds. We'll talk about those, but several of these in other counties benefit from a subsidy from the general fund, right? The county would be able to say, you know what, we're going to put a little bit of our general fund resource over there because you have discretion over where the general fund dollars can be spent. And so we would fund some of these other areas. But we don't do that here because we don't have enough to fund the core things the counties were established to do. So this is where we're at with this kind of gap, this JAWS graph thing that we have. As we say, it's a very simple math problem, right? The money coming in the door is less than the money going out the door. So solving the math, it's like very simple addition and subtraction, and it's very easy to cut things. I'd say that not lightly. It is easy to do it. It's actually much easier than the surgical approach, because the surgical approach takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of collaboration and trust among the people that are affected to participate in a process where everyone's going to lose something, right? But there's sort of a team approach, and Lane County has a long, long history of that type of collaboration. All right, so that's it on the slides. A few other things that I wanted to say. on the values-based approach. So there's always talk about priorities. Priorities are really important. The board has established priorities through a strategic plan. And we use our priorities. The board's established priorities, safe and healthy county, vibrant communities, well-maintained infrastructure, and an investment in our people and partnerships. Those are the areas that the board has identified as priorities. We use that in the process. We also start, though, with our values. That we have our purpose in Lane County is that we improve lives. Every person in this organization gets up every day, no matter what your job is. You're doing something to improve lives in our community. So everyone's contributing to that overall purpose and mission. And we try to lead, including with our budget process, with our values of integrity, excellence, equity, and respect, and our core behaviors that help create the culture in the organization, our passion to serve, our drive to connect with other people, and our focus on solutions, not just problems. So those are the things that we use to try to lead in the process. And so how we've defined that in our budget process each year, and again for this year, is that we put people first, the people that we serve and the people that we employ. And so we've done it for years, and we did it again this year. Again, it's probably boring, but it's a surgical approach. I think that is an interesting juxtaposition to what we see in other places. Federal, state, and local agencies have different processes. And oftentimes there can be an approach to say, we're going to cut the thing that is most valuable to you so that you feel the pain. We don't like that approach in Lane County. The last thing we're going to do is cut something that is the most impactful, the most valued, and the most impactful to the community. So all of the conversations we've had since October of this year, specifically about this proposed budget, I said all of us here in this room and some outside of this room, the conversation has been around what's the impact of this reduction? Who's going to be impacted? And what are the alternative options, right? So we are different from others, not just because of the unique budget challenges and this artificially low property tax rate that we have, but actually in how we approach the challenges that we have. And I think that's something that if we can ever find our way out of this place of extreme scarcity, to be able to fund parts of our systems that really need to be funded better than they are, we also need to make sure that we don't lose that, the way in which we approach the challenges we face, because sometimes, with more resources can come a tendency to sort of lose that. So I think, being careful to maintain that approach is really important. I'm going to walk through a few of the specific things and then wrap up here. Again, I noted in the budget message that the difference between the annual budget process that we have, which focuses on expenses versus revenues, that the simple math problem that is really, if you do it thoughtfully, it takes a while and is challenging, but I'm very impressed with the process that everybody participated in this year particular. So the expenses outpacing the revenues is the issue we're facing each budget year. This is a common challenge. Other cities, counties across Oregon and across the country are dealing with similar challenges. Growth in revenues that are somewhere between 3 to 5%, and expenses that are growing more like 7, 8, 9%, right? That's the difference. That's a common challenge, and we're seeing it in particular now because of inflationary pressures and all of that. The issues we face related to the public safety system being chronically underfunded, those are unique to Lane County for all the reasons that we talked about here. So we're focused on the first problem, the expenses versus revenue. That's what we do in the budget process, and I'll touch on the Public Safety Funding Task Force that is nearing completion, and recommendations should be forthcoming here on that. But first, again, our goal has been to maintain service levels as much as possible and as much as possible maintain workforce stability, because it's the people that we employ that provide the services. So if we have, in many cases we have to look at positions because That's where a lot of the cost is in how we're a service-based organization. But we try to not have to do that. We were able to identify $3 million, approximately $3 million in permanent expense reductions in the general fund. A lot of this, and we'll talk about that over the course of the next couple weeks. We did look at reducing positions, though the vast majority are vacant, or where individuals that are in positions are able to move to other positions. We looked at things like extra help, funding of extra help. These are sort of very temporary services that help augment the permanent work that we do, consulting, vehicles, training and travel, other materials and services. We looked at all of these things. So I think it's important, as an example, extra help is decreasing in the general fund by almost 40%. So significant reduction there. That will have an impact. So we don't want you to get the message that, oh, great, you fixed the budget problem for next year without having, we feel like what is proposed to you is manageable. It's not catastrophic, but it is impactful. It will have impacts. A lot of our work initially, starting in October, focused on central services. So we started meeting, when we say central services, we mean areas, the central parts of the organization that provide services to everyone else. Human resources, technology, facilities, county administration. These areas that every organization has to have, public and private, to be able to efficiently run an organization in an effective way. But we had conversations about our central services first, because we felt like, we really need to demonstrate that we're first looking at the areas that presumably least impact a direct service to the community, right? So it will be impactful to direct services because it's going to mean less of certain services for those direct service areas, but we felt we had an obligation to do that. And I was really pleased with the way in which our departments, our central service departments and our direct service departments had a conversation. We all met, proposals were put forward, the direct service departments listened to the central service departments about what the impacts would be. There was really good dialogue from direct service departments saying, please don't cut that. That's really gonna affect me. Let's go somewhere else. So there was the recommendations here did not come in they're not coming in a vacuum. They came really through this, I think, more collaborative process where we had a lot of input so that we could do what? Lead with our values and minimize the impacts on the people we serve and the people we employ. So on average, we're seeing about a 6% reduction in central service areas. We have not taken an across-the-board approach. We didn't say everyone takes X amount. We said, give us a range of reduction options and let's have a conversation about that. And what we resulted, so that the reductions look different in different places because of the result of those conversations that we had. And then in the direct service areas, the reductions range from 1.2 to 5.1%. The sheriff, district attorney, and the assessor took reductions of less than 2%. I felt that was important to do in this year that we're pursuing state funding for assessment and taxation, that we have a public safety funding task force that is meeting to try to find ways to fund more of the public safety system. And so we felt like, this was the right approach to do this year. I can't tell you that every budget in future years will look the same. It won't. There will be different dynamics and different impacts in the future, but that's what we have for this year. Revenue, folks always ask about revenue. We scrub our revenues. It's the first thing that we do before we have a conversation about expenses. We say, what are revenues? Why we rely on our departments to enter what they expect their revenues, because they know their revenues better than the central budget team is able to know all of those. So we push in all those areas. We review our fees, our contracts, our grants to make sure that we're capturing all the revenue that we can. We are proposing to move 2% car rental tax that was approved a couple years ago by the board and has yet been unallocated, and that is discretionary revenue that can be used to move that into the general fund, and that does help us mitigate the need for additional reductions there. We did include one-time reserves to continue the Mackenzie Valley and West Lane patrol services. It's very important to note that the funding for all of the expanded patrol services that we did, remember these two different pots of resources, one-time money, we kind of built our own 5-year levy, if you will, through largely federal dollars that we were able to collect through Secure Rural Schools and other things and help to fund some additional patrol. All of that funding will run out at the end of the fiscal year 2025. So that's a problem that we're going to need to reconcile with, or that a funding challenge, I should say, or that service will go away. So the proposed budget is structurally balanced, including the general fund, with the exception of the funds that I mentioned. We have 80 fewer positions. Again, I will say that because of our focus to say, you know, our people are important, the people we serve, the people we employ, and so we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to maintain that. That really was our focus in every single conversation we had about the budget, and I think that we were able to do the best we could do at minimizing the impact on positions and direct services. It's not without some pain, because there are 80 positions between this current fiscal year and this proposed budget that will be going away. Again, we believe that the number of individuals that will be impacted is limited significantly from that number, because a lot of those individuals will be able to move into, a lot of the positions are either not funded, or individuals may be able to move into open positions. So then I'd like to just touch on the two initiatives. You know, one of the things we always try to do in the budget is recognize that the budget is both a financial plan for the future. It's saying how we expect to spend the resources we have next year. It's also an aspiration for the future. It should be a reflection of values and priorities of the community and the Board of Commissioners who are elected to represent the community. So we do seek to identify where there are resources available that we can invest in those highest priority areas that couldn't be invested anywhere else in an area that may help support some of the reductions that I mentioned here. So the two that we're proposing here this year include two of the board's and the public's top priorities: housing and behavioral health. First, we're recommending the use of $2 million in video lottery dollars. Video lottery dollars is funding that we receive from the state and is restricted under state law to be used for economic development enhancements. And so we believe there's a nexus here to justify this use between the nexus between the revenue and the expense. This $2 million of one-time money, right? It is not ongoing every year. This is $2 million in the video lottery reserve that we're proposing to put into a housing land bank revolving loan fund. And the idea is, through our policy team, and Eric Mongan, who's joined us from the city of Cottage Grove, we've met with the board and talked about ways in which we can leverage the county's expertise, you know, government's expertise in navigating complex regulatory processes that frustrate people when they're trying to develop. We understand that world, and so we can help with that. So let's use what we do well, navigating those complex regulatory environments, by purchasing land, taking care of all of the regulatory related issues, zoning and building, you know, if there are permit related issues, wetland related issues, dealing with all of those regulatory constraints, and then putting the property out to the market for targeted workforce housing development that is in the county's area median income of around $91,000 per year. So that's what this program would do. It is intended to be a public-private partnership, again, that places the county, the government, where it does a really good job, presumably, at navigating those regulatory constraints, and places the private sector in the role that it does well, which is efficiently developing needed housing for the community. So we will seek to work with our private sector partners in designing that program. This is a proposal, this is an idea with an investment of one-time resources restricted for this type of a use. And we will work with our partners in the community to help develop a really robust program. The second proposal that we have, that we're putting forward, is the use of one-time and ongoing opioid dollars, $5 million in one-time reserves from opioid settlement dollars that we've received that are restricted for certain purposes again, as well as $1 million in annual funding that we receive from opioid settlement dollars for our proposed lane stabilization center. This will obviously be a 24/7 service that is a much-needed component of our system of care in many different parts of the community. So that's what I have. I'll end, well, I guess I didn't have a really nice, I thought I would say something that was maybe a little light for you, but this is how I'm feeling. I think this is how many of us here that are doing this work every day, and I presume many, if not all of you, are feeling that this is a difficult time. There's a lot of uncertainty, and it does, I think it's important that we acknowledge that it does cause stress, strain, anxiety, uncertainty. And again, I'll start where we began, that, let's seek to be the eye of the storm as much as possible, understanding what's happening around us, but maintaining as much as we can a sense of calm and focus and determination and clarity so that we can help lead our organization, our people, and the services that our community relies on in a positive direction. And then I'll just end by thanking the people that really did all the work around this process. Christine Moody, you're going to hear from, and our budget team. Jason and Jennifer are here. Kevin Mahoney, who's not here with us today, but also he is here. I guess he is here. Also did all the central budget office, incredible job as always with the limited staff to pull all this together. The staff within our departments, our department leadership, and the budget teams, financial teams within each of our departments that develop their department budgets and put them forward. And what I would say is it's not just the expertise and the hard work of these individuals, but it's the way in which all of these folks are approaching the work with common values and mission in mind, and trying to understand how we can maintain those values, that purpose, and our service to the community in the way that we can. So I want to thank everyone for your participation. I know we have a lot in front of us. I'm happy if there are questions to answer any of those. Otherwise, I'll sit down.
Great. Thank you for this presentation and for sharing about the scope of the work. And I just appreciate the values and the approach of everyone in the room this evening. I'll turn it to the committee for any questions. Hearing none, I will turn it over to Ms. Moody for her presentation.
All right, thank you. I apologize for my voice, getting over a cold and whatever else is in the air bothering me. So some of this I might skim over a little more because some of it's going to be repeat for the committee, but want to spend the time to go through some of the budget with you. So get my clicker going here. So the first part of this is information that we go over every year, but we could always have someone new from the public watching, of course. So what is our budget process and what stage are we at? We are obviously here with the budget committee, so second phase, and then we will adopt the budget. The board will do that in June, and then execute the budget by spending and eventually auditing. So again, here is the cycle, and just this shows who is responsible for each phase of the cycle as we go through it. So you already heard about the central budget office and department staff, including directors and those financial staff in the departments, along with the county administrator, develop the budget that's in front of you. Budget adoption occurs after the county administrator proposes the budget. You meet and approve, and the adoption. The one piece I didn't mention on the prior slide was the auditing of the budget. We have external financial auditors that come in after expenditures, after the fiscal year has ended, in order to verify that spending occurred in the way that we projected it would and reported it would. So the job description of the Budget Committee, you're receiving the budget document and the budget message, which is occurring tonight. There's a couple opportunities for you to hear from the public. The Budget Committee process in Oregon really is intended to involve the public in the budget process, and it's an opportunity for them to ask any questions as well. So tonight you will have a public hearing, and then the last night when you do deliberation, you'll have another period of public comment if there are individuals who want to comment. They can, of course, also send in written comments to our email, and we put that information on our website and in the document for any citizens, residents who want to participate. If there's any changes that the Budget Committee wants to make, then you'll revise the budget prior to approval, and then you'll approve those property tax rates, which happens at your last meeting. So this part I'll skim over, because here's just repeating those steps again, but kind of detailing how Lane County makes sure that these things are happening. The one thing I will mention is the budget document is on our website. It was put on the budget website last Monday, right after we met with the committee, so you received it first, and then the public had access to it. There's also a public copy. If somebody doesn't have access online, they can always come to the county administration office and view the budget document itself. So here's hearing the budget message, which you're doing tonight. Considering public comment, I already went over that. Revising the budget, so you'll hear from the departments in the work sessions that are to follow. And so if you have any questions or changes, you'll also hear some changes from some of the departments, things that have been discovered that need to be changed prior to your approval. So I'm aware of a couple of them that you'll hear about where maybe a grant was received or lost. And so we're changing FTE or resources and requirements. So you'll get those details from departments as they present. And then that's just an example of the motion. We have all of that for you as you approve, of course, and the tax levies that the Budget Committee approves. And then you will be finished with your charge for the year. So you saw this graph, Steve showed it. This is just meant to show you the different, all the different slices of the pie of the 34 funds that make up the budget. The budget size as a whole is staying relatively flat. It's just a 0.1% decrease. But then there are, of course, changes in various funds that you'll hear more about from departments, and then we'll get into the general fund a little bit. Here's the proposed budget by type. So general fund being the one general fund that we have, special revenue fund, that is the bulk of our budget. As you can see, the proposed budget being almost $595 million there. We have debt service funds where we receive funds into the debt service funds from the departments paying for debt service, and then we make those payments on the bonds out of the debt service fund. Capital fund, we have a couple capital funds. One of them mainly focused on facilities that's in our county administration capital management program. And then there's one newer one in public works, specific to their waste management and the Clean Lane project. And so some of the budget numbers, I will mention where that is impacting some of the numbers that you see. That is the impact here of the large increase, is the assumption of a $35 million project in 25-26 for Clean Lane. There's enterprise funds. We have a few of those, Lane Events Center, the Solid Waste Fund, and so those are staying, actually decreasing just a little bit. They'll fluctuate based especially in waste management based on projects that are happening or what they're doing with the landfill. Internal services funds, the bulk of that is going to be the places like the benefit fund, the health insurance fund, our PERS reserve, where we're receiving money into an internal service fund from department budgets and then making those payments, much like I mentioned in the debt service fund. We also have our technology services is in an internal service fund. So that is going up primarily because of benefit rates going up, and so there's higher amounts going into that fund. And then the last, the fiduciary fund, we have one of those. That's our retiree medical fund. That's a legacy benefit where we have reserves that are paying that benefit, and it will gradually continue to decrease in size. All right, the FTE. Here I'm just showing it to you broken down by service category. This is in your budget document in the appendices. We show you information on the FTE in a few different ways. But the 2009 FTE is a decrease of 27.15 from the current year budget as it stands right now. However, as you saw, the county administrator showed, we made reductions in the current year. In supplemental 3 in particular, there was quite a bit of FTE reduced that just couldn't wait until we built the 25-26 budget once they started reviewing their expenses. And so that's where we're getting the approximately 80 positions that are decreasing year over year. And then pointing you to those page numbers in the budget document if you want to look at those. A little bit more of the budget basics, revenue versus resources. You'll hear us talk about those in different ways. Revenue is the money that's coming in every year, property taxes, state and federal grants and taxes. And then we have other resources, which are going to include things like a fund balance, money that you're carrying forward from the prior year. It's not created every year over and over. It's just staying static for the most part. And then we have transfers that are occurring between our funds as one fund pays another fund for a service or some other requirement that they have. Requirements and expenditures, those are defined in budget law. Expenditures are very specifically personnel, materials and services, capital outlay, and debt service. And then we also have requirements the other side of the transfers. When there's transfers going in, there's always one going out. Contingencies and reserves, and sometimes we have an unappropriated ending fund balance. It's a type of reserve. Here, I won't read through all these terms, but these are terms that the public might hear us say and then not understanding what they mean. So defining those terms that I just said about personnel, material, and services. And then the first term being appropriation. That means that it's been, spending authority has been given through a legal board order resolution. This is meant to show you that the fund is the top of the structure in building the budget. With any fund, you will have departments or organizational units, but that's why you're hearing us refer to things like the general fund. It balances as a whole. It might not balance out in every department, but rolled up together, the fund balances. And then we go further into those object classifications is what they refer to them in budget law, those different levels that I just mentioned. And then to point this out, because this impacts what you see in the budget document, there are certain expenditures that belong legally to the department and some of them that legally belong to the fund. And so within department budgets, in particular, they're on the left, you'll see under expenditures and department, you will only see expenses related to personnel, material and services, and capital. Those are the things that are legally attached to the department. There over on the right, you'll see that transfers, contingencies, and reserves are things that belong at the fund level. So that's how the document is built as well. Of course, when there is a fund that is managed by a department, they are also managing the reserves and the transfers and contingencies. But this is the way you'll see it at the legal level in the document. And balanced budget. We all know that local governments, hopefully we all know, local governments have to balance their budgets. We cannot run a deficit, so we have to have resources equal requirements. Lane County also goes further and really focuses on the structural balance of our funds, making sure that ongoing revenue equals ongoing expenditures. When it doesn't, that's when we will report to you that there is a structural imbalance and that we're needing to spend one-time money that will eventually, something will have to change in service levels or other revenue coming in. So here are those 9 operating funds that Steve mentioned that are structurally not balanced at the point of the proposed document. I will note that this is the largest list that I've presented in the 10 years that we've been tracking this. So we're definitely seeing an increase in funds that are having some struggles. Some of the reasoning behind these, a lot of them mentioned either in other places, there might be enough general fund to fund them, but things like Law Library Fund, it relies on a state set fee. So they allocate funds to the law library, even though it's in the county budget. So we're not able to change those fees. Coroner's Fund also is reliant on fees, as well as the Clerk's Fund receives a piece of recording fees that occur in deeds and records. Community Justice Subfund is both the Parole and Probation Subfund, which you've heard us mention for a number of years, but they also have another program, Family Mediation, that is also structurally imbalanced now, and it is reliant on state funding as well. The Lane Care Subfund is in Health and Human Services. It is helping support some other services within Health and Human Services. You'll hear more about that from them. As well as the large Health and Human Services Fund has various programs in it, some of them structurally balanced and others of them not. So the fund as a whole is not structurally balanced. The Community Health Center Subfund, you will hear some about that, is not structurally balanced right now due to expansion that occurred. It will eventually return to structural balance, but it takes a while to get the fees and revenue coming in after expansion. And our Public Safety Levy Fund is no longer structurally balanced either, really because it's reliant on property taxes. So it will have the same problem that the general fund has. Property taxes do not grow at a rate fast enough to keep up with expenditures. And finally, the Land Management Fund, which is also something that you've heard from us before, really heavily reliant on fees. There is work right now with the Board of Commissioners on fee changes, so the hope is that it will return to structural balance in the future as well. Here is a chart that's a little difficult to read. It's got a lot on there, but just showing you the changes in revenue. The red bar being the 25-26 budget, the blue bar underneath it being 24-25. So we are definitely seeing increases in some revenue areas. State revenue being our top revenue. The majority of that revenue growth is around grants. So very specific use. It's not some of those state shared revenues. It's something that's been awarded for a period of time. The internal service, internal fees and charges, I mentioned a lot of that is around our internal charges to departments, either for central services or for things like PERS and health insurance and other benefits. So that's what's causing that increase. Taxes and assessments do have some modest growth happening. Property taxes, while growing slow, does grow pretty consistently. So we see some increase there. Federal revenue is declining slightly, some of that because of the return to the timber receipts. We're making a projection based on what we're seeing from activity of the reports we get every month. So projecting what that will be. And then let's see if there's any other. The other one I'll point out is the property and rentals. It's a bit skewed because the revenue for the Clean Lane project is showing up in that category. So it really is pretty flat year over year if I removed that 35 million. So that one is skewed. Then the expenditure side, a much shorter list, but materials and services, personnel, capital, and debt. Personnel services, as you'll note, is going up despite even reducing FTE, so still going up, seeing quite large increases in wages and benefits. And debt is showing that it increases because in the current fiscal year, we had a year of no bond payment for our 2002 PERS bond because we prepaid it about 15 years ago. So we had a little dip where we had lower payments, and now it's just back to normal for the last few years of that bond. All right, some on the general fund. So as we all know here, this is the general operating fund of the county. It supports the services listed there, predominantly public safety. Also, general government areas such as assessment and taxation and elections, public health, animal services, and then central services are the rest of those items listed there. It amounts to about 30% of the FTE is supported by general fund. Here's that pie again, but pulling that slice out to show you just the size of it compared to the entire budget there. The general fund will be 178 million, a decrease of 14.5 FTE occurring in the general fund. And we'll provide a little detail on that as we go. Also pointing you to those sections of the budget document and the service option sheets that you have in your binder that go through all of that discretionary general fund and what's changing. Discretionary general fund is a term that we use quite a bit. That means the revenue that's coming into the county that is not, the majority of it is not being created by department. The one exception to that, why I stumble on that, is assessment and taxation obviously does the work to bring in the property taxes. The property tax revenue comes into our non-departmental section of our budget, so it shows up as discretionary general fund that is then distributed to other departments. But this shows how much of it is discretionary general fund versus revenue coming directly into the department. Of that discretionary general fund, here is where it is being allocated to be spent in 25-26. So this pie does not include reserves because those aren't being spent. Those stay decently consistent. But of where we are allocating it to be spent, just under 74% of it goes to public safety. And then you can see general government, public health and welfare, and just a little slice of non-departmental, which is some county-wide dues and other things that don't really belong only to one department. So we budget them at the higher level. All right, some of the changes that are happening within the general fund. I mentioned that taxes and assessments are growing. Property tax growth is projected at about 3.5%. Our assessor projects that for us. Overall, taxes and assessment are growing about 3.25%. It was mentioned that car rental tax of 2% that had not been allocated yet is now being included in this proposed budget as operating revenue. So that's changing that number. The fund balance of the fund as a whole is decreasing by 20 million, but that is primarily because we have reserves set aside for those prior ARPA awards that were made. We ended up with general fund reserves when we spent down all of our ARPA funds 2 years ago in order to provide general government services. So we have a sub-fund in the general fund that is holding those funds, and they're just being spent down until they're gone. Administrative charges, that's the charges to departments for central services, have gone up. They will go up as the wages and benefits and costs of central services go up. So that's something that's standing out. Fund transfers are down just slightly. One thing I'll note is expanded patrol. While it was noted that we're maintaining it for the level it is right now, they did reduce FTE in the current year so that they have one deputy in each, one in West Lane and one in McKenzie, whereas they used to have 2 in each. Requirements changes, personnel services, seeing the market adjustments, cost of living increases and step increases. One thing I will note as you're looking at the proposed document is that the current year budget still needs to be adjusted for a lot of the changes in wages that occurred because of the AFSCME contract and the non-rep changes in the general fund. So it has happened in some of the other funds, but we'll be adjusting in supplemental 4. We typically wait on the general fund to make any adjustments until that last supplemental to see what's needed. I mentioned that just because it's going to make it seem like it's a bigger increase than it really is. We're going to have to increase the current year budget. And that's all taken into account in the forecast, and then so it will appear a little cleaner in the adopted budget once we've adjusted the current year budget. Material and services in the general fund are decreasing as a whole by about 5% after reductions are made, and there is a removal of some minimal one-time expenses. And then reserves, the primary general fund, so kind of excluding that ARPA project reserve that we have, is staying fairly static. It meets the minimum 20%. It has also some specific reserves for capital planning and what was started last year referred to as a life fund, local incident fund for emergencies. And then that sub-fund is in there and mentioning that it has reserves of about 9.3 million for those former ARPA projects. All right, I won't read through all of this, but this is just, and you'll see all of these details on the SOS forms. This isn't meant to be all-encompassing, but this is to give you an idea of the reductions that are happening across the departments because of the general fund shortfall. So this is general fund only. Again, we're only talking about that section of the budget, so you'll hear a lot more from other departments. But you can see the places where we've reduced FTE in places like many of the departments have reduced FTE. As Steve mentioned, we've reduced extra help. A lot of material and service budgets have been reduced. Things like travel and training for employees and outside vendor services. There have been just a couple places, one in the sheriff's office, which was mentioned, where there's been an allocation of a little more one-time reserve to maintain the expanded patrol. So that was an add, a temporary add. And then in human resources at the bottom, they're retaining a limited duration position. So they have it in the current year. And then to help offset their reduction just a little bit, they are retaining that position for a year. Also, I'll mention the second from the bottom, data and analytics has moved out of the budget. It used to appear as its own budgeted department. It is now within technology services. So that appears like a decrease of FTE in the general fund, but it's actually a move in the county budget as a whole. And you'll hear more about that from technology services. So the structural balance and how we started, you all heard a number from us in January and how we ended up getting to a point where we're saying that the general fund is structurally balanced. So the estimate that we had back in January was $6.3 million deficit. By the time that we had departments finish their entry, after leadership team, the deficit had decreased to 4.5, primarily because of additional revenue coming in. So that is where Steve mentioned we really rely on departments to tell us those final revenue numbers. And some of that was also central service revenue coming in for the charges for our central services out to departments. Also, a piece that I do want to call out is it includes an assumption, we mentioned this last year to you, where we are now budgeting what we need for Community Corrections Act funding, which supports the Sheriff's Office, parole and probation. It's the Public Safety Coordinating Council. And so that decrease between the two assumed more revenue than I was forecasting in the beginning. And if for some reason that doesn't come in, then the board will be hearing from us and we'll have to make a budget adjustment. But that is part of that there. The car rental tax mentioned is about $750,000. That hadn't been allocated, so that's additional revenue to the general fund. It was also decided upon further analysis to increase the vacancy variance. In that initial deficit back in January, we were projecting 3.5% vacancy variance. We increased it to 4.5%. So that's another about 1.5 million. Just for context, the current year budget has 5.5%. Sure, vacancy variance is where we're taking into account the fact that we will not have every position filled every day of the fiscal year. And we're taking that into account at the time we build the budget rather than waiting until the end of the year and just having money to carry forward. So really trying to budget the personnel budget for what we think we will really spend. And there's a financial policy that the board has passed that asks that all funds take that into account. So this is just the general fund percentage. Each fund does their own analysis and determines what makes sense for them based on what they're seeing and what they project for the current year. But they do all take it into account. So there's different percentages across. And then finally, the net reductions, after I mentioned there was just a couple places where we put some one-time general fund in personnel and material services is just over 2 million. And so that is how we get down to becoming structurally balanced. The one note I note under there with the reductions is the central service reductions that occur because they bill all the other departments and all the other funds. In the first year that it happens, it appears like it's 100% savings for the general fund. That won't last because in 2 years, when they bill departments for their reduced expenditures, they will receive reduced revenue. So only about, that's the opposite. I put the wrong percentage there. No, I did right, sorry. Reading it ahead. 75 to 80% is paid by non-general fund. Sorry, I was reading it as general fund. General fund only pays 20 to 25% of central service charges. And then what is not included in the budget, we are in bargaining with Lane County Peace Officers Association, the Sheriff's Office, which is predominantly in the general fund, and then the group workers, which are in youth services. So those contracts have not been determined, so we know that we'll have wages and benefits that will need to increase after that is approved by the board. And then these future cautions will look very similar to you as well. Wages and benefits still continues to be, we are an organization that has a lot of FTE and provides services in many places, and so that takes the wages and benefits cost. We are seeing growth in PERS still, so those rates continue to go up. And then health insurance, we saw about an 8% increase in the current year, but we continue to work on how to reduce that. And you'll hear more about that from Human Resources when they present to you and all their wellness efforts especially. There are still the services that are currently supported by one-time funds, the FTE in the Sheriff's Office, that those funds will be gone at the end of this fiscal year. And the aging infrastructure continues, our buildings, our roads and bridges. So there is a link to our countywide CIP where we discuss not only the projects that are planned, but there's also what we refer to as pre-planning forms that are really meant to identify a need. So that information is available to the Budget Committee as desired to look at that. It is a draft plan right now. It'll be a final plan after the budget is adopted. Then departments will revise that. And of course, service and community needs impact the county and how much we need to put into services for what the needs of the community as they increase. And then there is, I think we've all heard possible talk about a recession, which can make it harder, obviously, on the community and have more demand for services at the county level. And then the structural balance of those 9 funds that I mentioned. And just to continue the Debbie Downer tone, I guess, is the general fund structural balance will return. So because it is dependent on property taxes. So yes, we are structurally balanced, but revenue is just not growing as fast as expenses. All right, the next steps for you, I think you know, but just to reiterate for the public too watching, is that we will have 3 work sessions where you will hear from departments starting on Thursday. Deliberation and final approval of the budget will happen on May 20th. That's a Tuesday, so just pointing that out because we've had them on Wednesdays and Thursdays lately, but we're going to do it on Tuesday this year. Materials access for anyone watching is everything that's in the Budget Committee binders is being posted on the website, so you can find the materials. And then I think you all know your question answer process. Any questions, of course, can be asked during the meeting. We'll answer everything as time allows. You also have note cards in front of you, so feel free to write down any questions that you think might take more time or we just run out of time at the meeting. And we'll send those to departments if they need to research it for us and get those back to you as quickly as we can. And Jennifer is helping with that, so I think you all have her email in your binder. All right, that is it. So any questions or comments or anything else needed from us?
Excellent. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Commissioner Seneca?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Is the negotiations we're in with 626, are they not going to impact this fiscal year?
They will. Sorry, that was referring to general fund, but you're right. We have other funds that will, 626 and Admin Pro are in other non-general funds, but yes, they are being bargained. Yes.
Commissioner Buck?
Thank you. Early on, a few slides in, you had shown a list of some funds, and one said fiduciary. And you went over that really quickly, and I was wondering if you can explain that a little bit more. It went quick enough where I don't know what page it is.
Sorry, yeah. That is our retiree benefit fund. And that was a legacy benefit that employees received. County-paid health insurance for life was a benefit. We're not the only organization that did this. Back in the 1980s, health insurance was pretty inexpensive comparatively. So many local governments gave that instead of wage increases. And so the county did as well. It stopped before my time, where you had to have so many years of service and have been hired by a certain date, and it has different dates for different employee groups. So nobody is able to join it anymore, and we have some employees still working, but the number gets lower and lower. But we will have to continue to fund that medical insurance payment. So either on the county's plan until they're 65, and then it's Medicare that's paid if there's the supplements. So that fund is holding the reserve for paying that benefit. So we charge, now it's 1% of payroll that's charged to departments in order to fund that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Learned something new every day.
Yeah, true.
Other questions from committee members? Okay, thank you for that presentation. Believe next we have a break on our agenda, followed by the public hearing, but I'm curious from staff if we have anyone signed up for the public hearing? Do we wait until 7 or, okay.
We do, yes.
So maybe, should we have a quick break and come back? We'll break now and come back at 7 o'clock. Great, thank you. I'll call the meeting back to order. And I'll turn to staff to see if we have anyone online or in person for the public hearing. Okay. Do we have any other business for the good of the order? Oh, Christine.
The only thing I'll mention before you adjourn is you do have your schedule there. As I mentioned, we'll start the work sessions on Thursday. So you will be up in the Board of Commissioners conference room. Starts at 1:30. You will be hearing from, first off, Steve Adams for some legislative updates, updates since January. And then we'll hear from some central services, which you have not in recent years heard from them, but really wanting to cover, especially because reductions were taken in those areas, to give you highlights on those.
Great. Thank you. I think with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Way to go.